Hey, this is Briar with Briar's Fishing Tours, and today I'm going to teach you how to fish in a creek for trout and be successful. Stay tuned.
Oh yeah!
Let's start with the essential gear that you'll need, because your 12-foot long ocean pole isn't going to work out here. Go get yourself a 5 to 6'6" long spinning rod and reel combo. Spinning rods are the easiest to use in my opinion, and you definitely want to get one that's a little bit shorter because it'll make for much easier casting when you're fishing in these small little creeks and streams, which we will talk more about in a little bit. Reels are usually adjustable so that you can switch between reeling right-handed or left-handed, but here's my philosophy on that. If you were to pick up a baseball bat and swing it, do you swing right-handed? If so, then your reeling hand should be your left hand. That way you're not having to cast right-handed with your right hand and then switch the reel to your left hand so that you could reel right-handed. Your combo rod probably came with fishing line already on it, but if it didn't, you're gonna need some fishing line. And even if it did, you might want to consider switching that stuff out anyways, because who the heck knows what pound test line came on that spool unless it tells you in the package somewhere. The differences between all the different types of fishing lines that are out there is a topic for another video, because we could probably spend 30 minutes talking about that by itself. So what I recommend is anything between 4 and 6 pound test line. Trout are extremely finicky fish and they can see very well. So if you get something like 20-pound test line or 12-pound test line even, that stuff is thick and the fish can see that in the water and you're not going to catch anything. So go with something 4 to 6 pound test. Don't worry too much about the difference between monofilament and fluorocarbon right now. Just grab something that's on sale. The last essential thing that you're going to need to go fishing are some fishing lures. And this is just my opinion, but spinners work the absolute best for this type of fishing. Now I should have prefaced this at the beginning of the video, but I have 0 sponsors whatsoever. So anything that I'm suggesting to you during this whole video is strictly based on what things that I've found success with. I prefer to use 1/8 ounce up to 1/4 ounce Panther Martin spinning lures. Now, you can use whatever you want. If you can find some Meps or Blue Foxes, Rooster Tails, whatever kind of spinners, but these are about the size that I have found the most success with fishing in these types of creeks. You're definitely going to want to grab a few because you are very likely to lose these things, especially when you're starting out. Snags, when you're fishing in small streams and creeks, can happen very easily from getting hung up on rocks on the bottom of the water, or logs that have fallen in the water, or you cast too far to the other side and get stuck in a bush. Very likely that you are to lose lures. So get a few. I'm not sure how much color really matters, if I'm being perfectly honest. I will say that I do think that red does work really well. I don't know why, but I always seem to find success with red. This is actually one that I custom painted myself a while back, and actually did that in a previous video. I've done a few videos on Panther Martin spinning lures. I'll link those in the description below if you want to go check out a more specific deep dive on Panther Martin spinning lures, pros, cons, all of that, if you want to check that out once you're done watching this video. So if your reel didn't come with a line on it, I'll show you how to get that spooled up. And if it did come with line on it, you can skip ahead to the next section where we talk about a couple different methods for tying on lures. A lot of these more trout-oriented fishing rods are 2 pieces, as you can see here. This is an Ugly Stik GX2. So you can either put the rod together, and then you're gonna start with your line at the very top guide and run it through all of the guides all the way down until you get to your reel, or in this case, because I'm in a confined area in my office here, I'm just gonna use the lower portion of the rod and just use this guide here and go down to the reel. So let's get the reel attached to the rod. This is really self-explanatory. This just threads up here to loosen up, and then you're gonna set your reel seat or set your reel foot in here, and then close this up. And there you go. Now we have our reel attached to the rod. Now we'll grab our line here, thread it through what we have as the top guide for now, and I'll teach you how to tie a uni knot. Hold on to this little sticker that holds your line in place, because you're not going to use this entire spool, so that way you can put that back over your line once you're done. The little part that gets crimped there, I always try to clip that off just in case that got frayed or anything like that. So clip that off just a little bit so we're working with just straight, fresh line. And then we're going to run it through the top guide. I know this might be kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. And then really important is this next step. If you were just to tie your line straight onto the spool right here, it would not be underneath the bail, so you wouldn't do anything when you go to reel it up. So make sure 100% that you run your line underneath the bail first, and then wrap it around, and then we'll tie our uni knot. So we have the line under the bail, and then we have a loop pulled around right here. I know it's clear, it's hard to see. So we have that pinched. Now what we're going to do is make an overhand loop over the top of this, over the top of both of the other lines that we have, and go through 5 times. So loop this guy up. That's, if I can grab it. 1, 2, and do that 5 times. Okay, now that we have that, we're just gonna cinch that up a little bit there. Okay, can you see the knot that has created right there? And I accidentally just pulled my loop off of my spool, which can happen. So make sure we put that back on there before we cinch this knot up. Okay, so now I'm going to pull on the actual main line itself and cinch that down. See how that's cinching down against the reel? And just like that. Get that out of the way. Okay, and just grab your nail clippers or your knife and trim off that tag end there, a little bit of excess that you have. If you can't do that knot, you can do anything really. You can tie just a quick overhand knot 2 or 3 times. Anything to just tie a knot around that spool will get you going for now. I used to tie an overhand knot, you know, 3 times over and call it a day, and I've never had an issue because you put enough line on the spool itself that hopefully you're never going to get down to that backing where if you hook up with a big fish and you only have a little bit of line on the spool, where if it takes all of your drag out and you get down to that knot where that's the last thing you have holding on to fight that fish, if that happens, yeah, you want to have a good knot. But in all of my years of fishing, I have never gotten down to where I've had only a tiny little bit of line left on the spool and hooked up with a big fish and had it spool me all the way out to the end of my line. So any knot will probably work just fine. So we'll just come in here, trim off that little bit of excess. Make sure you trim the right one. Okay, close enough. Okay, it should look like this now. I know that's probably really hard to see, but we have the line. It's underneath the bail right here, and it's going up to just this top guide. These spools generally have a hole right here where you can just, you know, take a pencil, shove it through there, and then have a friend or somebody hold this like this while you slowly start to reel line onto your spool and keeping it nice and tight. If you don't have somebody to hold this, you know, you could just set it flat on a table and start reeling up. Because I don't have anybody in here to help me, we'll just kind of set this guy right here. We'll hold the line between 2 of our fingers and hold a little bit of tension, see that, against this, so that way the first wraps around the spool are not super loose. We want those to be nice and tight. And then just slowly start reeling up. And you'll see the line starting to go on the spool there. By keeping this nice and tight, we're preventing loops from developing on the spool, and we'll just do that until the spool is mostly filled up. You do not want line all the way out to the very edge of this, especially if you're using monofilament, because monofilament holds memory. If you go all the way out to the edge, that line will easily spool off of that when you don't want it to, and that'll create a huge bird nest problem. So you want to fill it up in halfway, 3/4 of the way full. So there you have it. Now we have our spool all filled up with line. See how I didn't go all the way to the outer edge there, left it in just a little bit. And now we're ready to tie on a lure. What I didn't mention above in the essential gear that you will need are swivels. They make it easier to switch back and forth between different types of lures by, you tie this little part onto your main line, and then this just has a little snap hook here that you can undo to switch out your lures without having to tie a new hook or tie a new knot every time you switch out lures. There are some pros and cons to these. I think that they do help reduce twists in your line, because spinners, when they spin in the water, they can twist your line up, so they do help reduce that. And obviously, like I just said, they're more efficient for switching out between different colors. On the downside of them, this is one extra thing that I think fish can see in the water. So if you're fishing and the water's super clear, maybe super shallow, and you're not getting bites and you're using a swivel, I would say maybe try getting rid of the swivel and just tying a lure straight on to your line. So sometimes I use these things and sometimes I don't. So if you don't have them with you, don't panic. You can just tie your line straight on to your lure and go fishing, not to worry. And yes, there are other ways besides just filling your whole spool up with monofilament line or fluorocarbon line. For example, you could run a little bit heavier braided line, but we're trying to keep it simple here, and that's just one extra knot that you have to know how to tie between tying a braided line to a fluorocarbon or monofilament leader. You definitely don't want to run braid all the way to your swivel or to your lure when trout fishing. I know some people might do that with bass fishing, but you do not want to do that with trout fishing unless you want to catch zero fish, because that will not work. Okay, now it's time to tie on either a lure directly or a swivel. The knot that I use is a Palomar knot, and if you've been doing a little bit of research and watched a few videos, you'll probably see a lot of people recommend a clinch knot or even an improved clinch knot, and I personally just don't like it. I used it for a long time. I lost a lot of lures on the cast just from the knot coming undone. So I switched to a Palomar knot, and the only time I lose a lure to a Palomar knot is if I get snagged up on a branch that I cannot get out in the water to get to it. But I definitely don't lose them from casting anymore. So how we tie that is find the end of your line and then come back, I don't know, 6 to 8 inches or so, and fold the line over and make a loop. Okay, so we're gonna take that tiny little loop that we have there now, and we'll tie it directly onto our lure here. So we're gonna run that loop through the little eye on the lure or on the swivel if you're using a swivel. Okay, and then slide your fingers back down to where you have the end of your tag end. So now we have the lure just like that. Okay, we're gonna come around, make an overhand knot just like you're tying your shoes. So come around the backside and run that loop through the knot. Okay, just like we're tying our shoes, except before you cinch that thing all the way down, you're gonna take this loop that you have in your hand right here, open it up, and put the lure or the swivel through it. And then don't hook yourself in the finger. Pull up on your tag end and the main line there, and cinch that guy down. And that is how you tie a Palomar knot. And you just clip off your little bit of tag end there, and you're almost ready to go fishing. The last thing you need to do before you make your first cast is check your drag. On this reel, the drag setting is on the top. On some reels, it's on the bottom, but make sure you get your drag adjusted to the right setting. If it's way too tight and you hook up with a big fish, it could break you off that way. Or if it's way too loose and you go to cast, and then you have the current from the creek taking your drag or a big fish taking your drag. So ideally what you want is to be able to pull up on your line and feel a little bit of tension, but not too much and not too little. So see how right there, that's probably too little. So I want to tighten this up a couple more clicks. That's maybe still too little. right about there. You feel some resistance when you pull on that line, but not too much. Like if I were to go way too far, well, that's probably too tight for trout fishing, at least. Maybe for different applications, bigger fish, you adjust your drag accordingly. So to cast, you want the lure to hang down below the tip of your rod, a couple feet starting out. You can go longer than that, but you wanna make sure you know what you're doing first, because you might accidentally let go of your finger on the line too early and hook your buddy next to you or something like that. So start with just like a foot or two of line hanging down from the tip of your pole, and then spin the reel around to where the line is as close as it can get to the rod, and you're going to grab onto it with your finger there and pull it towards you, and then open the bail and cast out. And as you get better at casting, you will learn how to hold tension on the line right here with your finger as you're casting, and that will help you cast a little bit farther. And there's not really a good way that I can teach you that. It's kind of a feel thing, so you're just gonna have to get out there and practice. And the more times you cast, the more you'll feel that line up against your finger there, and you can almost kind of like flick your finger towards you a little bit while you're mid-cast to add a little bit of extra weight, so to speak, to the lure to cast further. Now that your pole is rigged up, you need to figure out where to go fishing. If you have no clue at all, I would start with a simple Google search and see if there's any fishing reports near the area of where you live. And if that doesn't get you anywhere, I would try going to your local fishing store and ask those guys, and they could probably help point you in the right direction. The general rule of thumb is trout live in elevated areas, high elevation around here. There are fish at lower elevations, but the fish that I typically catch are at 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet of elevation. They also like cold water. Trout are not going to be usually swimming around in your lakes that are at low elevation where the water's 70, 80 degrees, something like that. That's not where trout thrive. All right, so you found a spot and you're ready to start fishing. So where do we cast first? Plan accordingly before you get right to the water's edge, because remember, we're stream fishing here, which often means shallow water, which means fish can see you, feel you, and hear you. And if you spook them, you aren't going to catch one. The good thing to know is that trout most oftentimes are facing upriver, because that is where their food naturally is coming from. So don't cast downstream and reel back up for a few reasons. Trout aren't used to their food coming by their tail first. And most importantly, if you're casting downriver and reeling up, that means that fish is probably looking right at you and you're not gonna catch it. So always try to cast upriver and retrieve back towards you, or at least cast across the river at maybe just a little bit of an upwards angle and retrieve back across towards you. If the water is moving really swiftly, it's not likely that a trout is just hanging out in that area, unless there's a big rock for them to get behind and kind of get out of the current and wait to ambush their food that way. So if you see a big rock, sticking out of the water, the idea would be to cast beyond that rock upriver and then reel back towards you and pull your lure right under that rock where you think that fish might be hanging out, and try to pull one out that way. You definitely want to look for deeper pools to fish, and depending on the time of day could change how you present your lure in the water. If you're first thing in the morning or late afternoon and you see the fish jumping out of the water or surfacing, then you probably want to cast and retrieve pretty quickly to keep your lure up towards the top of the water. But if it's maybe midday, a little bit warmer outside, you don't see any fish rising, then cast into those deeper pools, let that lure sink down to the bottom or wherever the area may be that you figure out where the strike zone is, and try to pull fish out that way. They're not always going to be in the same spot, so it's going to take some practice and figuring out where the fish are during the time of day, during the temperature of the water as well. One of my favorite things about stream fishing is that you never stay in one spot for too long. You are constantly moving upriver, so don't stay in one spot for too long and take 100 casts. Walk up to an area quietly, like I said before, take 5 to 10 casts, and whether you catch a fish or not, move upriver to the next spot. You do always want to try to fish up rivers instead of downriver for reasons that I previously mentioned as far as spooking fish and stuff goes. But this isn't your boring, lazy lake fishing day. So take a few casts in a spot, don't catch anything, move on to the next one. Or if you do catch one, you're probably gonna spook the rest of them by that fish splashing around. So get on moving to the next spot. There's days where I hike miles upriver before I even start fishing, just to get past where all of the regular people are willing to go. And then I hike more miles upriver while I'm fishing too. So you're definitely gonna get a workout in while you're doing this type of trout fishing. The single biggest key to success that I can give you for trout fishing in small creeks is to have patience. You have to have patience with this type of fishing, especially when you're starting out, because you are going to get snagged and lose lures. And I guess simply put, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And if everyone was doing it, there probably wouldn't be enough fish to catch. So have patience. You will get better with practice, but you aren't gonna get better sitting on YouTube and watching videos all day long. So you do need to get out on the water eventually and practice, and you will land some fish, and I can warn you, it's pretty addicting. So with all that being said, thank you for taking some time to watch this video. I hope you learned something, and if you did, and if you want to see more of my fishing, how-to fishing, hiking, camping, backpacking adventures, feel free to hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment, let me know what helped you the most, or if you still have questions, feel free to ask them and I will try to help you out. We'll see you in the next video where we're gonna break down the difference between a slightly more expensive rod and reel setup or a slightly cheaper rod and reel setup, and if it makes sense to spend that extra buck or not. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.